Archive Servitor 93 Omicron is online. Accessing archived Imperial data. Initiating story protocol. Journal logs of former Guardsman Thaddeus Kane, 3rd Platoon, Cadian Shock Troops. Classification: under investigation. They promised us glory when we took the oath, standing in those recruitment halls with their banners hanging overhead, listening to the commissars speak of honor and duty to the Emperor. The way they painted it, we were going to be heroes, defenders of humanity against the darkness that lurks beyond the stars. We believed every word because we wanted to believe, because what else was there for us on those factory worlds and hive cities, where the only future was another generation of grinding labor in the manufactorums? I am former Guardsman Thaddeus Kane, 3rd Platoon, Cadian Shock Troops, and I served 7 years in his Imperial Guard before taking a last cannon blast to the leg that sent me home. 7 years across 4 different war zones, watching good men and women die for inches of ground that meant nothing to anyone except the generals who moved us around like pieces on a game board. 7 years of learning what it really means to serve the Emperor's will in the trenches of the galaxy's most brutal conflicts. What I am about to tell you might shatter every romantic notion you have about life in the Imperial Guard. This is not propaganda. This is not the sanitized version they show you in the recruitment vids. This is the unvarnished truth about what happens when ordinary people are thrown into extraordinary hell and expected to hold the line against nightmares that would break your mind just to look at them. You see, most people think they understand what war is like. They imagine heroic charges and glorious victories, last stands that get remembered in song and story. But the reality of Imperial Guard service is something else entirely. It is months of boredom, punctuated by moments of absolute terror. It is watching your best friend get torn apart by alien claws while you reload your laser gun with shaking hands. It is the constant knowledge that your life means less to the command structure than the ammunition you carry. The first thing they strip away from you in basic training is any illusion that you matter as an individual. You become a number, a resource to be expended in service of the Emperor's will. They break you down completely, then build you back up into something that can function in the hell they are preparing to send you into. The physical training is brutal, yes, but it is the psychological conditioning that really changes you. They teach you to shut off the part of your brain that questions orders, that hesitates when told to charge into certain death. I remember my first deployment to Korath Prime. The transport ship took 3 months to reach the war zone, 3 months crammed into cargo holds with 10,000 other soldiers, breathing recycled air that tasted of fear and desperation. The smell never left you. Human bodies pressed together in spaces designed for equipment, not people. Men and women from dozens of different worlds, all speaking different dialects, all trying to prepare for something none of us truly understood. When we finally made planetfall, the first thing that hit you was the sound. Not the explosions or the gunfire, though those were constant. It was the screaming. Human voices raised in agony, in terror, in rage. The sound carried across the battlefield like a living thing, worming its way into your skull and setting up permanent residence there. You learned to sleep through it eventually, but you never stopped hearing it. The enemy we faced on Korath was something the briefings called indigenous resistance. That sanitized language did not begin to capture what we were actually fighting. These were not rebels with stolen imperial weapons. These were creatures that had been changed by something ancient and terrible, twisted into forms that violated every natural law. They moved wrong, fought wrong, died wrong. Some of them kept moving even after you put a last blast through their center mass. Your training prepares you for human enemies, for conventional tactics and recognizable weapons. Nothing prepares you for the moment when something that used to be human comes at you with too many limbs and a mouthful of teeth that grow in spirals. Nothing prepares you for the way they smell, like rotting meat and ozone, and something else you cannot identify, but makes your skin crawl. The worst part was not the fighting itself. It was the waiting between engagements, huddled in whatever shelter you could find, listening to the sounds of war echo across the wasteland. It was checking your equipment for the 100th time that day, because keeping busy kept the fear at bay. It was writing letters home that you knew would never be sent because mail service to active war zones was considered a luxury the Guard could not afford. We lost 60% of our regiment in the first month, not to heroic last stands or glorious charges, but to disease, exhaustion, equipment failure, and simple bad luck. The replacement troops who arrived to fill our depleted ranks were younger than we had been when we started, barely out of training, wide-eyed and eager to prove themselves. We tried to prepare them, tried to share what we had learned about staying alive. But some lessons can only be taught by experience. The replacements lasted an average of 2 weeks. That became our grim running joke, watching fresh faces arrive with their pristine gear and regulation haircuts, knowing that in 14 days most of them would be feeding the local scavengers. They came to us full of questions about glory and honor, asking when they would get their chance to prove themselves worthy of the Emperor's favor. We stopped trying to answer those questions after the 3rd wave of reinforcements. What broke most of them was not the violence itself, but the casual nature of death in the Guard. A stray artillery shell could erase an entire squad without warning. A moment of carelessness during equipment maintenance could trigger a grenade that killed your tent mates while you were taking a piss behind the supply depot. Disease spread through the ranks like wildfire, claiming more lives than enemy action ever did. You learned to sleep next to corpses because moving them required energy you needed for fighting. The officers tried to maintain morale with speeches about duty and sacrifice, but their words rang hollow when they delivered them from behind armored command bunkers while we bled in the mud. They spoke of strategic objectives and acceptable losses, reducing human lives to numbers on requisition forms. A commissar once told me that individual suffering was irrelevant when measured against the survival of the Imperium. Easy words from someone who had never held the intestines of a dying friend in their bare hands. Food became an obsession, not because we were starving, though the rations were barely adequate, but because eating was one of the few activities that reminded you that you were still alive. The taste of recaf, bitter and synthetic as it was, became a small miracle you could look forward to each morning. The sound of your own chewing was proof that your jaw still worked, that you had made it through another night. Sleep was a luxury measured in minutes rather than hours. Even when exhaustion dragged you under, your dreams were filled with the faces of the dead and the sounds of battle. You learned to wake up fighting, grabbing for your weapon before your eyes were fully open. The distinction between sleeping and waking began to blur after months of constant alertness. The medics did what they could with limited supplies and no real training for the kinds of injuries we sustained. Flesh wounds got sealed with whatever adhesive was available. Broken bones were splinted with salvaged metal. If you lost a limb, they might fit you with a crude prosthetic, if you were lucky. But more often they simply declared you unfit for duty and shipped you to the rear lines to die slowly from infection. I watched good soldiers lose their minds under the constant pressure. Men who had survived dozens of engagements would suddenly start screaming in the middle of routine maintenance, clawing at their own faces as if trying to remove something invisible. Others went completely silent, mechanically following orders but no longer registering as human in any meaningful way. The medics had no treatment for battlefield psychosis beyond sedation and restraints. The veterans, those few who had survived multiple deployments, developed their own coping mechanisms. Some found religion, clutching prayer beads and muttering litanies during firefights. Others embraced gallows humor, making jokes about death and dismemberment that would have horrified their younger selves. A few simply went numb, functioning as efficient killing machines with no emotional investment in their own survival. Communication with home became impossible after the first year. The astropathic networks prioritized military intelligence over personal correspondence. Letters became valuable currency, traded for extra rations or better equipment. A photograph of a loved one was worth more than ammunition because it reminded you why you were supposed to keep fighting, even when that reason felt increasingly abstract. Equipment failure was a constant companion. Laser guns that misfired at crucial moments, body armor with gaps where the ceramite had cracked, boots that fell apart after weeks of marching through toxic mud. You learned to maintain your gear with religious devotion because your life depended on every component functioning perfectly when the shooting started. A jammed weapon or a faulty power cell could mean the difference between returning to your squad and feeding whatever predators roamed the battlefield after dark. The hierarchy of the Guard was absolute and unforgiving. Orders flowed downward through layers of command, each level adding its own interpretation and priorities. By the time tactical decisions reached the enlisted men actually doing the fighting, they often bore no resemblance to battlefield reality. You followed orders anyway because the alternative was execution for insubordination, delivered by your own commissar with ceremony and precision. Supply lines stretched across impossible distances, delivering resources months after they were needed. So there you have it, the unvarnished truth about what it means to serve in his Imperial Guard. Not the heroic tales they spin in the recruitment halls, not the glorious martyrdom promised by the commissars, but the grinding reality of human endurance pushed beyond all reasonable limits. We were not heroes. We were not legends. We were ordinary people, fed into the meat grinder of galactic war, expected to hold the line until the machine found someone else to take our place. Some of you might wonder if I regret my service, if I curse the day I took that oath. The answer is more complicated than you might expect. I regret the friends I lost, the innocence that died with them, the nightmares that still wake me decades later. But I do not regret standing between humanity and the darkness that wants to devour it. Someone has to hold the line. Someone has to pay the price for the Imperium's continued existence. We did our part, those of us who served and died and somehow lived to tell about it. The Emperor protects, they tell us. Perhaps he does. Perhaps our sacrifice means something in the vast calculus of galactic survival. All I know for certain is that we answered when humanity called, and we paid whatever price was asked of us. That has to be enough, because it is all we had to give. Archive transfer complete. Click like command to confirm comprehension. Engage subscription protocol to ensure continued access to future archive editions.